What's up, everyone? This is Jacob Moses, host of the Not Boring Tech Writer, where in each episode we cover a different skill so you can enhance your skill sets, improve your marketability, diversify your career, and really just be an example of someone who is breaking the stereotype that technical writing is a boring career. This episode's skill: getting involved in a community. And to discuss the value of getting involved in a community, there's truly no one else I'd rather have as a guest than my guest today, Eric Holscher, who is co-founder of Write the Docs. And if you're unfamiliar with Write the Docs, it's an organization that's just relentlessly building a community around documentation. Whether you're working strictly in documentation as a tech writer, or maybe you're affiliated with it as a designer or marketer, Write the Docs has given us a meeting place, whether through its annual conferences or local meetups, that has just been so empowering for both myself and I know thousands of others involved in documentation. So I'm going to stop talking because Eric just has so much awesome stuff to share, both on the value of getting involved in a community in general, and then once you are in that community, really making the most of it, having the right mindset. So without further ado, here's Eric. Hey there, Eric. How you doing today?
Not too bad. How about you?
I'm doing good. I mean, this is one of those podcast episodes where, like, I got to text my mom and just, like, tell her that I get to interview the co-founder of one of, like, the dopest organizations. And she kind of understood. But it
sounds about like the level of understanding my mom has.
I'm glad you can relate, but seriously, I'm so thankful that you agreed to be a guest, especially since we're on the home stretch before the Write the Docs conference coming up this weekend.
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. I'm sitting in my living room with a massive pile of boxes.
You're preparing well. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we have lots of stickers and lanyards and badges and all sorts of good stuff.
There you go. Some swag for the attendees.
Yep.
Yeah. So Eric, as co-founder of Write the Docs, I mean, you obviously understand the power of community, the power of just gathering people together, whether that's online or in person. And I'd love to just hear your story and the moment, or maybe series of moments, when you really understood and embraced the power of community.
Yeah, so I guess really it was kind of straight out of college. I got a computer science degree at Mary Washington in Virginia, and I kind of moved halfway across the country to Lawrence, Kansas, to work on a web shop that did programming at a newspaper. And I kind of got dropped into the middle of kind of the Python language community and the kind of Django web framework community specifically. And so I went to PyCon, which is kind of the big gathering of Python programmers every year in Chicago that year. And that's really, I was just kind of blown away by, all these people who use all the software that I use every day were just there and super accessible and really just like human. And I just met so many really, really interesting people and just really kind of felt welcomed. And, even though I was just like some little brat who just graduated college, like just this sense of community and the sense of just having a tribe, I think is kind of the current way of describing this feeling, was just very, very profound for me. And it really, I think I've gone to PyCon every year since then. Actually, PyCon is the week after Write the Docs in Portland this year. Really? So just adding to the stress level of, I'm doing a 3-hour tutorial the next week, that following weekend. So
dang.
That's,
you got a lot on your plate, Eric.
It's kind of like a yearly thing. The first Write the Docs conference was the week before I went to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So it's really just like a long history of overloading myself with conference organizing and lots of other good stuff.
Seasonal stress, but good stress.
Exactly. But yeah, really, I think PyCon, and then throughout the years, kind of branching from there, I've really just seen so much value in a lot of the different communities. And a lot of those communities were really the inspiration for Write the Docs, kind of the open source, quote unquote, community conference is our kind of our template or our inspiration.
So you knocked out college and got involved with this community of programmers. And I know that you mentioned that community was really an inspiration towards starting Write the Docs. But why a group of documentarians? What motivated that?
So I guess there's kind of the long version of the story, which is probably appropriate here, is that in 2010, there was a project called the Django Dash, which was a 48-hour just hack day, right? Where it was kind of just everybody just get together in teams of 2 or 3 and just make something over a weekend. It's really fun. It's pretty common in the programming world. And kind of as a member of the Python community, I'd been writing a lot of documentation, but it was really, really kind of hard to host it. And so the little hack day idea that we kind of came up with was an ability to basically just have a little web service that sits there and listens to GitHub webhooks. You know, and whenever you make a commit to your documentation, you're like, hey, like it should automatically rebuild, right? Like we have the technology to do this. And there was nothing really out there that did it. And so that project that we created on that hack day was called Read the Docs, which is still today an open source kind of documentation hosting platform. And it's just kind of built on that core idea of, right, it's still, the core function of it is still kind of, you know, tied to GitHub or tied to a version control system and, you know, automatically having your docs up to date. And then the project kind of grew for a couple years. And that took us to, I think, 2012, where I was hanging out at a cafe with Troy and a few other people. We used to do these weekly kind of programmer meetups in Portland. I was kind of lamenting the lack of community around our project. Where it's like, hey, like, you know, why we have a lot of users, but we don't have any community. And so how do you build community? And Troy's kind of a serial conference starter. He did a JSConf in Japan. He did Node PDX. He's done a few other ones. I think Cascadia JS and a couple more. That's kind of his idea, right? He's always like, you know, just get people in a room and magic happens.
Yeah,
right?
It usually turns out well.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you get the right people. So yeah, that's really where it was. Is just kind of we kind of envisioned it as being a user conference for Read the Docs, which is where the name came from. Kind of that transitive read write thing that I think still confuses people till to this day. But yeah, and so we really just wanted to get a community of people that cared about documentation. And, you know, both of us having backgrounds as programmers has really kept, you know, we didn't just be like, hey, let's make an event for people that write documentation full time. It's much more of let's create an event for people that care about documentation. And that's where the whole documentarian concept came from was, you know, Eric Redmond, actually, who was kind of the third person who was originally kind of there helping us do it. He actually coined that term for this set of people where it's like, you know, it's not a job title, right? It's a worldview. And so, yeah, it's like, that's one of the really cool things about the conference today is that it's not just writers, right? It's programmers, it's support people, it's designers, it's marketers, you know, anyone who within an organization cares about documentation, you know, they have a seat at the table. And I think that's really important.
And I loved a line in y'all's origin story on the Write the Docs website from Troy that read, I saw a community that didn't see itself. And documentarians are already, for the most part, used to being siloed. But I think it's so powerful that you and Troy came together. The origin story said that Troy ran into you at an eatery, just again, that sense of community. And since then, just how many people have been interested in Write the Docs. I know in that first meeting y'all expected between 50 to 100 people, and then ended up being over 250.
Yeah, somewhere a little over 200. Troy tends to overinflate. You know, you add a little 10% onto the numbers to make it look good.
Still cool.
But yeah, no, he like made the website for the conference kind of the first time, and we just put it on Twitter, and then it ended up at like the top of Hacker News, and yeah, we ended up getting like 300 or something signups to the mailing list on like the first day. So it was like, oh wait, maybe we need to kind of reevaluate some of our assumptions here.
People were pumped about it, and rightfully so.
Yeah, but no, it was really just kind of came out of nowhere, and yeah, I think we launched it in January of 2013, and then the conference was actually in April, so it was a very quick turnaround.
Got it. And then also, in addition to the conference, you have the meetups, which are local in cities. I think it says 15 cities worldwide. When did meetups get involved? When did that occur?
It really kind of got going after, I believe, the second conference. I think we had maybe like one or two sprout up, maybe in Portland, I think, after the first event. But it was really kind of the second year where people were like, hey, this isn't like a fluke. That thing I felt last year, I feel it again. And it's like, I want to be surrounded by these people, more often. Yeah. And kind of be able to have that local community in places and kind of manifest that feeling of, like you said, people kind of tend to work in silos, especially around writing and documentation. Like having a place to go that's full of other people like you is really exciting. And, it sucks if that's just once a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I live here in Boulder, and we have a Boulder, Denver Write the Docs meetup. And it's just a really great group of people that are all committed to the craft. So at least here in Boulder, we're very appreciative of y'all's meetups.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's been going kind of off and on, at least for a year or so. And hopefully, I think every year after the conference, the meetups really get kind of invigorated.
Yeah.
It's really, now that we're starting to have a set of meetups, people come and they're like, oh, I had to leave my city, go somewhere else. I had to go to Portland and sit in this really cool room. And I met the people from my city that I should have known, right? It's that kind of hilarious. Just like, yeah, we traveled, 1,500 miles just to meet someone who lives, 5 miles away. Yeah. And then, yeah, you form those friendships and those bonds and yeah, you keep them going.
Yeah. And since you and Troy started Write the Docs, I think you said January 2013, I mean, y'all have seen rapid growth. I think over 600 attendees at the Write the Docs conferences each year, 1,500 meetup members. I mean, what does that say about people's desire for community, especially those who work in documentation?
Well, I mean, I think everyone wants community, right? And that's one of the really kind of powerful things is, I think particularly in kind of the tech writing world, is a lot of people feel kind of cut off or siloed. And they don't feel like they have a sense of community, right? And so I think that's really what's drawn people is, as Troy said, there was this group of people who just didn't know each other existed. Mm-hmm. And when you kind of build those bridges and kind of people come together, then they then invite other people. And so in terms of growth, I mean, I really have no context for what good or reasonable or grow, like it's just like starting a community and seeing where it goes. Mm-hmm. The conferences get bigger every year, which is always exciting. And yeah, I think it's grown at a very sustainable pace though, right? It's not, it's more of a linear growth than an exponential growth. And I think that's a much healthier way to grow in general. Yeah. And it's been really exciting just to see. I think the conferences get about 25% bigger every year. And the meetups are growing a little bit faster than that, but only because they started at a small number.
Yeah. And you're in the States, you're in Europe. I mean,
yeah, I actually just had somebody email me from Barcelona a couple days ago being like, hey, I want to start a meetup here.
Heck yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. But yeah, I think there's just so much value to feeling like you're part of a broader community. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people, programmers that care about documentation, they can be kind of ostracized in the programming world, right? It's definitely not getting the respect that it should within that profession. Mm-hmm. That's one of the big things we're trying to change, and we've slowly advanced that, but there's still a lot of work to do. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different kind of ways that people get into the community. But I think for the most part, it is still, that the core is technical writers that didn't feel like they had a community before.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned before just how surprised you guys were with all the different people working in different disciplines that attend the conference. tech writers, designers, typographers, API-driven startups. I mean, it really attracted a large group of people that all care about documentation. And I think that's very powerful.
Totally, yeah. And it's cool to see that a lot of the, little startups, with 5, 10, 20 people, it's something they're starting to see, the value in, and it is really a differentiator. And, it's part of their sales and marketing. It's, I think people are really starting to see that it's an important part of a product, especially if you're selling to a technical audience, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so someone's interested in getting involved in a community. Maybe it's as large as they're at the Docs conference, or more local like one of y'all's meetups, or a similar community near where they live. How can someone get the greatest value from the community? What perspective should they have whenever all of a sudden they find themselves among like-minded people?
And I think this is one of the things that I've always kind of had this weird cognitive dissonance about when people talk about networking. And I've always viewed going to conferences and interacting with people as just like meeting awesome people and making friends. Right? Mm-hmm. And I think like when people use the word networking, they view it as much more of like a transaction where like, I will help you and you will help me. And like, we'll have this transactional relationship. I think it's really just going in and kind of being open and just meeting the interesting people and seeing who's there, going to a meetup, talking to the organizer, asking if you can help them, because one of the best ways to kind of feel connected to a group is to help out. Maybe after you go to a few of the meetups, you can give a lightning talk. I think that's one of the things that we keep at every conference, because it's a really great way to get people up on stage for the first time. Just like a 3, 4, 5 minute talk about something that you care about, right? It's not super, it's not overwhelmingly scary or anything, right? It's, if you get up there and only talk for 3 minutes, then it was not great, it's over. Right? There's no kind of freak out moment, But yeah, I think in general, just like coming in with like the right mindset of meeting interesting people and not having like an agenda of like, I want to get a new job and I'm going to find people at these 3 companies, or, just being like, hey, who's here? Who's cool? Let's see who I can connect with, like on kind of a personal level. Because that is so much of it, right? Is, the sense of isolation of being kind of in a silo or a lone professional in an organization is, it stunts your technical skills, which is something that, meeting people at meetups is great for, but it also just kind of sucks. like it's not fun. And psychologically it can be really, really difficult to, there's all sorts of issues around that. And, finding other people that do similar work and have similar values, is just makes your job and your life better.
I agree.
So I think that's a really exciting part of, having these communities, is just kind of making those connections.
Yeah. And I love how you're talking about kind of on a meta level, the difference between community and networking. I know when we talked on Monday, I was using the term networking a lot. And then last night, whenever I was thinking about this podcast, it was like Jacob, like that's not the right term, because I agree with you that networking kind of has this like you said, like a transactional notion to it, when it is so much more than that. Like if one's goal from a conference is to find that next job, like awesome. But like you said, there's so many other benefits. Meeting dope people is a huge one. And then as maybe you have ideas down the road, someone you can reach out to partner with whenever you have a problem in your organization that you're trying to solve, someone you can reach out to. And I mean, just pure friendships. I mean, networking doesn't capture that. I think community is the much more appropriate term, and Write the Docs has really, really captured that as well, I think.
Well, and it's a lot more fun to work with your friends, right? like making like that's the great thing about events like this, is you kind of have an implied rapport where it's like, hey, everybody here cares about this thing, right? Yeah. So we have something to talk about, but it also kind of like you can break in at a personal level and kind of really interact with people, and that you have that professional connection.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So it's like, awesome. Oh, I made a friend, and now I can like work with this friend because we're in the same discipline or care about the same things. So yeah, I think that's obviously it's still a professional event, and you still need to act professionally, and we have a code of conduct and all these things. It's not like go crazy and get drunk and it's not college, right?
Yeah.
But I think like there's so much more value to be had on personal connection and just kind of feeling as a member of a tribe, right? Like that was really the feedback that we got that was kind of the most impactful. The first couple of years of the conference was, people walked into the room and they were like, I didn't know there were this many people on Earth that cared about this stuff.
It's super encouraging. I mean, I think there's 8 of us in our Boulder at the Docs meetup, but I still walk in and I'm like, 7 others. I'm into this.
Yeah, and it really, you don't need a huge number of people. They need to be the right people.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I know Troy said it was a tribe of documentarians existed, but they didn't have a central place to meet each other. And you guys have provided that meetup, even if it is just an annual conference. It's still very encouraging.
Well, it's kind of like it's the nucleus, right?
Yeah.
Troy has always been the wordsmith. Like I've never actually had a job as a writer. Troy now actually is like, he is a writer for Twitter. And that the original origin of the post about the origin story was his blog post about joining Twitter.
Oh, wow.
To be a writer. Like,
cool.
I think we linked to it from the origin story, like the original post, but it's kind of, he's much more eloquent. I'm just the one that, kind of makes things happen. And I care a lot about this stuff, but writing is actually not my number one best skill.
Hey, it's all good. Write the Docs probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for your skills.
Yeah.
Even if writing isn't a primary skill.
But yeah, no, I think that really captures. I think the other kind of phrase that we use a lot that I really care deeply about is kind of when we say we're about the art and the science of documentation. Because I think there's definitely an element of that where people around all technical skills, right, they kind of view it as a mechanical or something that has no art to it. And I just love that kind of framing where it's like, hey, like we're here to talk about, tips and tricks and, like writing techniques, but also, there's a lot more to it and it's a much broader discipline. And yeah, just kind of being able to kind of have it be fully represented in that phrase is something that makes me happy.
Yeah. And so for anyone who's listening, who's attending the conference this weekend, we're going to have this published tomorrow so people can hopefully give it a listen before Saturday's hike or Sunday sprints.
You can listen to it on the plane.
Yeah, there we go. But how would you just encourage attendees to just perceive the conference in particular? I know we kind of talked about in a general sense how you should kind of approach community and get involved. But just this conference in particular, how can someone really make the most of it?
So I think one of the, coming from an open source background, we've stolen a lot of the really good open source ideas. And so we've basically just made an open source conference for writing. And so that's, the hike was kind of my own thing just because I love hiking. But everything else pretty much has been stolen or, inspired by other events, right? And so I think one of the big mistakes that people make is that they come to the conference and they watch every talk. And I'm not saying that every talk isn't worth watching. I'm just saying that so one of the really cool things that the space and the venue allows us to do is there's an entire secondary venue space that we run as an unconference during the main event. Cool. And so, we have a single track conference, which means you never have to choose between talks. Mm-hmm. But there is that kind of, you can choose between a talk or you can choose between a discussion that's going on downstairs. And I think for a lot of people, it's really easy to choose the talk because it's a known quantity, whereas the discussion is a wild card, right? But I think that the point of being in a room is talking with other people in the room. Yeah. There's so much good content in the talks. There's so much really, really interesting stuff, but there's so much knowledge in the room, right? And one of the big things we do is we encourage the speakers to attend the conference. So that means that the speakers aren't just like dropping in, giving a talk and leaving, right? Like all of the speakers are around. So they're going to be down at the unconference, right? So you'll have a speaker on stage, but you also have somebody who spoke earlier in the day downstairs, maybe leading a discussion or something like that, right? So there's so much value in the interaction between people. And that's really what we try and highlight, right? Sunday, the entire day is all about interaction. We have the writing day, which is inspired by open source sprints, which is basically like, let's just get together and work on stuff, right? Like, let's see how, anything from like, oh, you're using this editor to edit Markdown and it like does all this magical stuff for you. How does that work? Like, to, a little bit of introductory material on, here's how you commit to Mozilla Developer Network, right? They're one of our sponsors and they have people there every year kind of shepherding people through the contribution process. Cool. And there's just so much there. I think everybody's just there kind of working on their own stuff, and it really allows you to connect over the act of writing, and not be just like passive, right? You're sitting there, you're doing stuff, you can contribute to projects. And I think so much, the talks are the core of the event, and so many of them are going to be really good, but there's always going to be a few that aren't applicable to you. And some of the ones that aren't applicable to you are super interesting and inspiring. But sometimes you just got to roll the dice and go downstairs and have a discussion.
And when I think about my own past conferences experiences that first come to mind for me, I mean, kind of like a fanboy after seeing your favorite musician at some dive bar and they're roaming around the bar afterwards. You see these speakers, and then just in that more laid back environment, you can just walk up and say hi and just share how valuable them sharing the expertise was and how it applied to you. It's very powerful.
Yeah, and that's one of the pieces of feedback that we get every year is like, oh, I was having this conversation with somebody at the reception the night before. That's one of the things we do is we don't do any indication of who somebody is on their badge. So the speakers, the volunteers, everybody, they have the same badge. And so it's this like really cool thing where you have a really good discussion with somebody in the reception or like Monday morning, and then Tuesday or something, they get up on stage and give a talk, and you're like, what? I just, like I just had a really cool conversation, and I didn't even, it's that whole kind of, and that's one of the things that Troy really brought in with the group photo at the end, being on the stage, is like that whole kind of like, this is a community, right? Like you belong on the stage, you belong, like everybody is equal. And these people that are speaking this here are not inherently better. And that's one of the things we really do try and kind of enforce, or not enforce, but reinforce, I guess, is, come give a lightning talk this year, next year, maybe try and give a talk on stage or lead a discussion. And a lot of the welcome wagon stuff that we put out was around that, right? Like how do you kind of navigate this space in a way that makes you happy and, making people feel empowered. It's like, yes, you can get on the stage. Like, it's cool. Is a really fundamental part of what we're doing, and if that, like, it's so important to us that, people do feel empowered, and it's not just the same, 15 people up on stage every year. But it's like a new set of faces, and that they're doing interesting stuff, and that they're members of the community, right? Like they're kind of doing stuff that we all care about, and they're around and they're accessible, and yeah, I think it'll be really good in that regard.
It will, and it's awesome that you guys aren't only just inclusive and inviting of people from all sorts of different disciplines surrounding documentation, but once they are a part of that community, you're encouraging them to take, momentary leadership roles and to really be a thought leader, whether it is a long talk or a lightning talk. I love that.
Yeah, and it's super empowering, right? And a lot of people won't necessarily lead a discussion their first year or their second year, but they'll go down and they'll participate, right? And that's just as valuable.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Eric, I appreciate you so much and really taking the time to talk with me today. And I hope listeners aren't only just encouraged to maybe step out their own front door and get involved in a community, whether that is within development or documentation, but also just encouraged to check out Write the Docs, both the annual conference and the local meetups, because there's a ton of value packed in there.
Power too.
Yes.
if
simultaneous.
One of the big things about trying to change, the software industry and that kind of stuff is having that constituency and, having the group of people that are sitting in a room that they care, like that shows a lot that it's important. And yeah, but not, and we do a really poor job of kind of taking people from Googling Write the Docs into being a member of the community. I think we do a really good job of it in person, but ironically, the documentation is not that great. Cobbler shoes and all that. But that's one thing we are really trying to do is everyone isn't able to attend the conference, and whether it's economic or geographic, or you just had other stuff going on, or and really trying to find ways to kind of build the community. And I think we didn't really touch on this too much, but the Slack channel has been really, really great around that, and just giving people kind of those more informal and easy ways to connect without necessarily having to go somewhere in person is super important as well.
Oh, well, let's finish off with the Slack channel. I'm unfamiliar with that, actually, Eric.
So it's just a bunch of people that sit around and talk about docs. Really?
And anyone can be a part of the channel?
Yep. Yeah, I think we have about 450 members right now.
Wow.
And I mean, but there's a few channels. Like there's just like a general, which is like a main channel that has pretty good banter. But it's a lot of people. I think somebody was just like, how do I translate my docs into Japanese? And then somebody will be like, oh, this person works at this company who just did that, and then they'll like ping them, and then they'll kind of just like jump in, and it's just a really cool place to kind of have some fun informal chatter, but also there's a lot of really good kind of communication, and a lot of all the meetup organizers have like a little channel that they kind of coordinate in, and it's just slowly trying to grow that kind of it's an obvious point of contact for people in the community, and it's just a nice way to kind of feel connected any day of the week that you really want to feel or ask a question, or just kind of be a part of it.
Yeah. So. And you said a lot of banter, but there's nuggets of wisdom in the banter always.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Eric, again, man, I appreciate you so much for talking. And let's just finish off. Where can people find you online if they want to connect with you and learn more about Write the Docs?
Me personally, if you just Google my name, Eric Holscher, Twitter or ericholscher.com are probably the easiest ways. And then Write the Docs is just writethedocs.org. And similarly on Twitter at just Write the Docs. And at writethedocs.org, we have a full kind of resources guide that's like, here's all of the places we are, here's the Slack channel, we do have a forum that's kind of, the Slack channel's taken a little bit of thunder away from, but there's lots of good resources there.
Awesome. And for anyone who's listening, who's interested in those references, I'll include that in the show notes as well. Cool. Well, Eric, thank you, man. I look forward to hiking mountains with you on Saturday in Portland.
Yeah. Bring a jacket. It's probably going to rain.
There you go. As it should. Typical Portland.
Exactly. Cool. All right. Well, have a good rest of your day.
You too, brother. Great talking.
All right. Bye.
Bye.